The Right2KNow Campaign is threatening to take legal action against the SABC should the organisation's restructuring process undermine the constitutional right to information. The public interest group says millions of poor and marginalised South Africans are at the mercy of the SABC because it is their main, if not only, source of information. R2K points out that while the public broadcaster is facing financial challenges and has to fight for economic sustainability, the SABC should not be run like a private company that has to make profits. Joining us now is Thami Nkosi, who is the Countering Repression Organiser from Right2KNow. Thami, it's great to have you. Thank you for your time and your voice this morning.
Good morning, Lynn, and good morning to the viewers at home.
What would the measure of a compromised mandate be? Because it's not the same as some of your normal cases that you fight, such as a classified document and the government refusing to make it public. So please explain what a compromised mandate would actually be in this case.
Look, I think it's pretty clear. I mean, we are for free flow of information and informed citizenry in order to make the decisions that affect people's lives. And I think the understanding that we stand from is that the SABC is a source of information, source of education, the source of, making a democracy fully functional, so that the citizens can actually be able to make informed decisions. And one of the problems with the SABC falling into a mandate that is not necessarily in line with the constitutional provision or the constitutional demand of what the public broadcaster should be will have a dire effect in the functioning of our democracy, because then it simply means that there will be sections of society that will be excluded from accessing information, being informed about what is happening. And as a result, that would really put our communities in a situation where they're living in a world where they don't know what's happening around them. And this is a bigger source of information that is, that feeds the information into our communities. And we cannot necessarily afford the SABC to abandon that mandate. So as much as we understand the complexities and the problems that the SABC finds itself in, what we're calling for is that the SABC stays true to the mandate, the constitutional mandate that it has to serve the people of this country, to inform the people of this country. And as a result, we cannot necessarily sit by and allow a situation where certain sections of the radio stations, for example, are closed off, when other, in different sections of society, some communities depend solely on radio, for example. So the threat of shutting down certain radio stations or, minimizing the effect of certain radio stations would have a dire impact. And in a society where we thrive on free flow information and access to information, we cannot afford that.
Tell me a very important question, and I mean, we ask this on behalf of viewers and of listeners and those that consume the SABC. Being a public interest group, working with people on the ground, do regular South Africans show any concern? And would they actually be bothered if their constitutional right to know could actually be infringed upon here?
Well, I guess that's one of the reasons why we exist as a civil society organization, as a social movement. That's the reason, to try and actually bring this to the fore and bring this into the public discourse. Because quite frankly, we live in a society that has deep inequalities, where essentially certain sections of society have as much information and others, sections of society do not have as much information. And that, as a result, then it simply means that people are not necessarily partaking in the conversations and the public discourse about certain institutions like the SABC, for example. So we cannot necessarily we cannot necessarily paint everybody else with the same brush to say people are not necessarily concerned about what happens in the SABC. But we must also understand that the inequality in this society simply means that certain people would not even be aware of what the constitutional mandate of the SABC is. And as a result, that's why we exist, to make them aware of that, so that they can be able to make the choices and be able to engage in the conversation. The most important thing is that we need to bring this into a public discourse so that there's a public conversation that is happening. And that's the key thing that we're actually fighting for, and that's the reason why we exist as a civil society organization.
Now, the Right2KNow proposes a complete overhaul of the role of the public broadcaster, and this is where I think it would be interesting to actually find out what shape or form of overhaul of the SABC is Right2KNow actually proposing. What would you like to see?
Well, What we would like to see is a public broadcast that puts the interests of the public, that puts its mandate at the center of providing a service to the general public of this country, to understand that this is an important tool in the development of this society, that we cannot afford a public institution or a public broadcaster that is not necessarily going to serve the interest of the public. That's the first thing. And secondly is to ensure that no matter what happens, the debates that happens internally, the restructuring or the debulking of staffing within the institution is not necessarily going to compromise the fact that this serves to be about the public. And for us, we fundamentally require that the SABC stays true to its mandate, no matter what happens at different levels. And that would simply mean that everybody that is there puts the public first. We say no politicking, no political appointments, no political interference. And essentially, we ensure that the public maintains the control of the SABC and what the SABC seeks to do. So at the center of everything else, this is a public broadcaster that the biggest shareholder of it is the public, and it must remain as such. So we're just simply saying we need to strive off every other influence, every other attempt to essentially divert the mandate of the public, of this public broadcaster, and it must remain in the hands of the public. So what we would resist is any form of interference at any level, whether by private corporations, whether by a political interest or any other form. This must remain true and central to the lives and the development and the social contract and the social conversation of this country, and it must remain true to its mandate.
It's quite a difficult one because, at the end of the day, it is unfortunately funds that keep you floating, and this is where we are now hitting into a bit of a dead end. And we started off, we were chatting off air, and you really gave us quite a wonderful answer in terms of the crossroads that we as an organisation find yourself. And in and amongst your answer, I also want to throw in, the SABC is being criticised for pursuing a financially viable organisation to the point of commercialising part of the public institution. Your organisation says the SABC shouldn't be run like a private company that has to make profits. But at the end of the day, there are salaries to pay, and there are people that are working very, very hard to be rewarded for the work that they're doing. But the structure of it is just not here. Obviously, we need to find a middle line. But what you were saying, which is very, very important, is that crossroads that we find ourselves in. Where are we right now as an SABC? And I know that you say that this process is important to be happening right now.
I think it's a difficult process. It's a difficult time, but it's necessitated by the fact that we have known the SABC to be what it has been all these years, and all the issues that had happened with the SABC, the former CEO, and everything else that has happened. I think everybody's aware of that. But I think we're at the crossroads where we're in an intergang. The old can't continue, and the new has to be born. And the truth of the matter is that it's a beautiful thing that this is in the public spotlight right now, so that we are able to have this conversation, essentially find a way. Because my belief, our belief is that democracy means dialogue and consensus. Let's have every stakeholder having a view and putting out their views across, and let's consider each and every view of every stakeholder, and the public being the biggest stakeholder here, to say, how do we find a balance? We cannot necessarily take the bigger portion and say, let's make it for profit. We need to find different models. And I think we're not necessarily expert with regards to what the best model would be to make sure that the SABC is financially viable, yet at the same time remaining true to its mandate of serving the public, of the interest of the public in this country. So what we're essentially saying is to say that let's not have these conversations only happening in the boardroom and a few individuals making certain decisions that may not necessarily be beneficial to the larger society. And the most important thing for us is to say it's a good thing that is happening right now. We understand that the old cannot continue and new has to be born. What is this new? And I think in a democratic society, that's what we thrive in, and that's the beauty of it, that we've confronted with the question of saying what is the new and what is the old. And we must continue to have this conversation, and every voice is important under these circumstances. There are tensions, of course, even within civil society organizations. There may be those of a view that may hold a view that's totally different from Right2K, and that's okay. But for us, it's to say, how do we take this conversation forward? How do we find the best model for, to ensure that this institution, as important as it is, as critical as it is, to the lifeline of this organization, continues to actually serve its purpose. So no, we will not necessarily sit here and pretend to have all the answers, but I think all of us as a society, as all different sections of society, have the answers, and we need to have this conversation and find the best way to move forward.
All right, Thami, thanks for talking to us. Thami Nkosi is he's from Right2KNow, discussing some issues here at the SABC. Thami, again, thanks for your view.